NAIOP Northern Virginia's government relations efforts.
John Moskowitz, State of Martin Housing Development Manager.
Morning, I'm Poonam Ramgopal. I'm Supervisor Smith's Land Use Aide.
Mike Spots, Habitat for Humanity, DC and Northern Virginia, and Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance Board of Directors.
Hi, Lenore Stanton, Vice Chair of the FCRHA, and on the CC staff and similar committees.
Hi, Joe Mondoro, Province Appointee AHAC. Bill Minnesota Administration.
Jill Norcross of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance.
Martin Reiser, VP of Land Acquisition for Canyon Indian Homes.
I'm Grace Hyman. I'm the ADU and WDU Program Administrator.
Good morning. I'm Megan Van Dam. I am the Division Director for Affordable Housing Development.
I'm Tom Fleetwood. I'm the Director here at Housing.
Oh, I think you're up.
Oh my goodness. So first of all, good morning again, everyone. And on behalf of the staff here at the Department of Housing, a huge thank you for being willing to do this. I know that our commitment to you is to try to have this have a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that we can get a good set of recommendations out to our Board of Supervisors. Our staff has a tremendous amount of information to share with you. We're looking forward to getting right into the discussion about the challenges that we're trying to solve with respect to the WDU program. Just taking a step back, the original WDU program was developed and implemented in 2007, and I can say, having served as staff to that original committee, that much of the emphasis then and much of the emphasis has remained on the rental side of the WDU program, and I think certainly that's been borne out by by the level of production under the WDU program itself. The vast majority of units that have been produced have been rentals. We are, however, starting to see increasing numbers of for sale WDUs being delivered, and those WDUs, the for sale side, is experiencing many of the same challenges that the rental side experienced. We are having, all of us collectively, trouble marketing and selling the units that are reserved at 100 and 120% of the area median income. With respect to the rental piece of the program, we had a task force that also worked for quite a bit of time to develop recommendations for the board that resulted in, if not a consensus entirely, at least a path forward that everyone could understand and move forward with. We're similarly hoping that this group can help us come up with reforms for the WDU program on the for sale side, particularly with respect to the income served, that will allow us to have a program that works for our development partners, that works for the low and moderate income home buyers that we have in Fairfax County who would like to purchase their part of the American dream, and something that works at a policy level here for the county. So just a little bit of context there for you. I know we'll go through timing here coming up, but we're very excited to have this collection of talent here at the table, and are so appreciative again of your time and willingness to do this. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Anna.
Okay, so I have the fun part of talking about process and a lot of the logistics that we have. So also thank you for for joining us and for being a part of this effort. As you may know, the board matter that was put out there by what really directed us to look at the effectiveness of the income levels, but we're really going to look at the as much of the program that's not working as possible in the time we have. And of course, we have a very short time. We're trying to wrap up by the end of this year, and we have about 8 meetings scheduled, and we'll kind of go through the schedule at the end. Wanted to kind of introduce the sort of composition of the task force, and you kind of look around the room, a lot of you might know each other. We tried to make it kind of a diverse group of stakeholders in order to get kind of all the perspectives, both market and affordable, advocates, government. So we really have a lot of folks who have been in the industry, kind of understand some of the challenges, and also are even delivering units. So we really thank everyone for joining us. And then as Tom said, this is really a consensus-based process. So we really want to kind of have a collaborative conversation. We want to be respectful of each other, kind of listen really, really intently, and make sure we sort of respect. Hopefully we don't have to raise hands, but I think we can all kind of, take our turn to speak and make sure we're listening to our colleagues. In terms of the roles, so Candace will sort of guide us in our efforts, and I'll kind of support. We also are staffed by, kind of staff at HCD. We have support from DPD as well. Kelly Atkinson will be joining us in future weeks. And so we have kind of, and we also have consultant support to help us out on our way. We're currently engaging a consultant and are working through the scope. But their task is really to help us do the financial analysis on both kind of the impacts of changing the income limits and how that could shake out in various scenarios, doing some stress testing of a model that they'll put together for us, looking at both the supply side and creating the units, as well as the sales side and the pricing of the units. They're also going to help us look at some of the challenges like condo fees and those items. So we're really appreciative to have that support. And that'll help advise us. And so some of the tough questions that we ask here, we can kind of take back and have them do some additional research and help us out in that way. In terms of the output, we're really looking at kind of putting out a framework. So we're probably not going to be kind of going deep into the language, but hopefully everyone sort of read the policy, reread the policy, and is sort of ready to kind of talk about some of the big issues that they see. So what we'll probably come out with is similar to what the rental task force came out with. I think the last time this effort came out. I'm not sure if we have that in the packet today, but
it's the last page.
Okay. So the last page of if you turn to the last page of your packet, we'll kind of see the framework that was developed. And really we want to have some guiding principles of how the general program will be adjusted. And then we'll also take back a lot of the feedback to create some other recommendations in terms of, any other challenges we have in administration of the program. And then staff from both HCD and DPD will work together to develop inline edits that will then be, go through a stakeholder engagement process and then be vetted through the Planning Commission and the board. Make sure I don't miss anything. Any questions so far? Just want to going through pretty quickly in terms of the process. We also have, so like I said, our timeline is pretty tight. We have about 8 meetings. We plan for the initial ones to sort of be setting the stage, starting to define our challenges, starting to think through kind of what our full scope is and kind of what we can tackle in the time we have. We're going to have a presentation today from Grace and Megan, who will really dig into what our current status is and sort of how we are able to sell units and some of the challenges we're experiencing there, as well as some of the programmatic challenges. And then in future sessions, we'll start to really get into those challenges to make sure that we can identify some options, start to really litigate those, and then also be advised by our consultants and get their data and analysis to help inform our discussion. We hope the last few meetings will really be kind of more in the weeds and sort of tackling the details of how we're going to put out the recommendations. So hopefully the first half of our sessions will sort of be the kind of getting it all out there and getting sort of some draft recommendations, and then going from there. We budgeted one, I think, additional meeting in the end. So hopefully, if we can be quick, we won't need it, but if we need it, we will certainly use it. I think that's it for logistics. I think we'll probably also work through sort of any, I think we'll probably have some things that are outside the sort of overarching scope that we want to tackle. We might have some parking lot, some issues at times, but we want to make sure that we kind of get through and really do a holistic rewrite because this is a great opportunity for us, and we'll have kind of another opportunity for a little while. So, if there are no questions about.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Just for kind of logistics purposes, this group is being treated as as a group that is meeting the public meeting requirements. So we are recording the meeting. We're going to post those recordings on our website. That is up now if you want to take a look at it. And we'll talk at the next meeting about the potential for hybrid meetings if you can't make a meeting and you need to join virtually, what those options are.
Yes, that's a quick question. If we're, I guess, so we're being treated as a public meeting, does that also mean we need to be careful about the number of people who are getting together or having conversations outside of our formal meetings?
Correct, right. And so it's no more than 2, right?
If I may just add one thing, if I could, with respect to our consultant, we are planning to use HRA Associates, who are the underwriters for the Amazon Housing Equity Fund and who have done extensive work for HCD. So we're looking forward to working with them. Also, with respect to the makeup of the committee, I did just want to note that we had one industry representative who we'd invited to participate, was not able to make the commitment, and we're working on another representative from industry that we hope we're going to be able to have in place here in time for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well then we will turn it over to Megan and Grace.
And I'll just say that I'm very appreciative of all you all for dedicating the time here. Grace has been doing some extensive research to put together the production, the sales data for the WDU for sale. She has some comparisons of the program to the rental. So she'll be going over the policy, the program, how well it's working, and then conclude with some of the challenges that we've been talking about internally, just to get the conversation rolling. So thank you all again, and I'll turn it over to Grace.
Okay, I'm going to get right into it. I think this committee, everybody here is pretty familiar with the WDU program, but I'm going to provide a brief overview, including some of the policy and the WDUs that we've delivered so far, those that are going about to be delivered, and again, some of the challenges that we're facing.
Grace, hold on, it's not advancing. Let's make sure I'm on the right. There.
And so we haven't gotten very far, so we're fine. And some of the challenges that we're seeing, we really want to spur some of the conversation. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly so we can get to your conversation. The WDU policies that apply here can be found in the comprehensive plan, and more specifically in Appendix 1 of which has the guidelines for provision of WDUs. We're talking about here lots of different policies. There's the 207 policy that is countywide, the 2010 Tyson's policy, and the 2021 revision, which resulted reduction in rental, and we really would like to see something similar on the for sale side. The WDU guidelines sort of give us incentives to encourage the development in high density areas, and the areas that are applicable are the Tyson's urban centers, suburban centers, like the Dulles 28 corridor, which we're seeing a lot of active development, and community business centers like Annandale, or transit stations like Reston Wheelie and Innovation, and sometimes those areas can overlap. So Innovation and Dulles, for example, those can overlap. The WDUs that we have received so far are in this from the countywide, where the expectation is 12%, and that 12% is a combination of ADUs and WDUs, and the ADU calculation comes first. So sometimes it could be all ADUs that delivered, and sometimes it's all WDU delivers, but the zoning ordinance takes precedence in the calculation. So right now, as mentioned, the units that we've had so far delivered in the WDU for sale side are all on the countywide 12% expectations. We have not had any non-high-rise, and I don't know of any coming up in the future, which is unfortunate because these have the deepest affordability for us, and so we would love to see some of those. On the Tyson's high-rise, we do have a on-site Tyson's condo delivering with that 14% expectation. They also have a off-site provision, which I don't think they are going to avail themselves of, but what we're seeing kind of across the board is almost everybody is using those minimum expectations, and we're not seeing additional bonus density. So really nothing above the 12, 14, 16 densities that are expected. Here's the comparison of the for sale and the WDU side, and you can see from this that the rental has much lower AMIs and a lower amount of units to be delivered. So the for sale has definitely higher number of total units, higher affordability levels, which is something that we would like addressed in this group, or we'd like some help in figuring out solutions to WDUs. One of the challenges that we have is with our for sale pricing, and we are currently looking into addressing for sale pricing. This sheet, and I want to emphasize, is the maximum for sale prices that are available for offering WDUs on the market. And we are finding that when units are initially offered, builders are almost always opting to use the maximum sales price regardless of the type of unit that's offered, something that you wouldn't necessarily see on the open market. So a 2-bedroom condo would be priced the same way. The max price would be the same for a 2-bedroom condo as a 2-bedroom 2/2 unit. So again, we are looking at our pricing and how we can improve that. The pricing is set on starting with the HUD area median income, which is quite high for this area, 142 for family of 4. And we use for each of these different bedroom levels, we use the maximum size, family size that can fit in the unit currently. And this is again something that we're looking at to try and make the units more affordable. The last time, previous to last year's price increase, we hadn't looked at price increases since 2017, and really we did that change in 2017 in response to developer concerns about the rising construction cost. But since then, the interest rates have also risen, so these units are at the prices that on this list are really unaffordable to most of our home buyers. I'm going to talk a little bit about the WDUs that have been delivered so far, and that production. I'm talking really about units that have been delivered to us through a notice of availability and offering agreement, so an official agreement between the developer and the county on what units are going to be offered. So we've had 73 WDUs delivered so far. Most of those are, well, not most of them, the largest grouping is really at the 88% AMI level, and they're really throughout the county. So while the expectation is 12% at 80, 100, and 120% sort of equally across the board, we are seeing more 80% units, and some of this is proffer related. And sometimes the supervisor of a particular area has negotiated heavily for units at a lower AMI, and this is why we're seeing some 70% units, especially in that Reston area. So we have ADUs, and this is by AMI and the structure type, and of the units that have been delivered so far, that started delivering 2018, we have quite a number of flat, one-level flat units. And then we have these stacked townhouses, which is the back-to-back and 2/2s are sort of that next grouping of delivery, and fewer, obviously, townhomes, even though townhomes we know sell better than the other unit types. And I also want to point out on these AMIs that you can see 41% of the units were at this 80% of AMI, and almost a similar amount of 100% AMI deliveries, fewer WDUs at 120%. So in the pipeline of units coming up, and I'm going to be talking about, we have a really robust pipeline coming up, and these are units that are about to deliver in the near future. I'm not looking at anything past the start delivery of 2023. So a lot of things coming up that are going to start delivering very soon. There's 74 WDUs in the pipeline that we're going to start delivering in some kind of development in 23. These are developments where I've actually spoken to the builder, and they've said, yes, we plan on offering some. Obviously, not all 74 of these will be delivered in 23. They will be delivered over a number of years, especially in the, in the larger projects where when you have 20 units, those will definitely be delivered over multiple years. In the units coming up, you can see that the structure type is a little bit different than what we've received in the past. So fewer flats and many, many more 2-over-2 stacked townhouse units are going to be offered, and a few less townhomes will be delivered. And the a lot more 80% AMI units are going to be delivered, which is a good thing because these tend to sell much better. We have a crossover between people that are buying in our first-time home buyer program that already can afford ADUs, who tend to be able to sometimes just stretch a little bit and buy those 80% unit WDU units. We really don't have that with 120% AMI units. So for now, right now, the fact that we're only getting 7 units in the very near future is a good thing at that 120% level. I'm going to talk a little bit also about the sales of what we've seen to date. And these are sales through today, the things that have actually closed. We have a couple units that are under contract with pending contract that I'm not really including in the sales data. I don't know if those units will fall through. Hopefully they won't. So this is a look at sort of the WDUs as how well they're selling. And we can see that a lower percentage of WDUs at 120% of AMI have sold. So if we get 70% units, all of those have sold, 100% of those have sold, 80% units, 90% sold. But when you get to the 120% AMI units, only about a little over half of those have sold. So we know that there's some problem with the units at that AMI selling. We also have seen that the average days to sell WDUs at the higher income limits increases exponentially by the AMI. So, 70% units sell 70 some days, but 120% units take over a year to sell. So we're seeing this is an average date of days to sell of the units that we've had so far. So 14. Obviously, we would like to not have that situation. Yeah.
So I see this from availability of an offering agreement.
Yes.
Is that is that to close or is that to contract?
To close. That's until close. And I'm glad you asked that, because I will say that the numbers here are based on the day the notice of availability and offering agreement is signed, but we do some marketing before that happens. And with WDUs, we've done some aggressive marketing before that happens to try and get these sold. We're working with the WD developers because we'd like to, get the word out about units that are going to be coming up. We put them on our website. We often send out mailers to people that are renting WDUs in the vicinity who are already at that income tiers to hopefully, spur interest in moving from a rental to a for sale unit. The other thing we're finding is that the WDUs that have sold with some kind of seller incentive. So that means that the builder has lowered the price, they've lowered the AMI, which also ends up in a sales price reduction. The sellers are offering closing costs, seller credits, and sometimes they're prepaying a year's worth of condo fees on the flats to get these units sold. So that amount of incentive increases by the AMI of the unit. So, the builders are having to put in quite a bit more to get these units sold.
Grace, if I could add to that.
Yeah.
And that seller incentive is just on the first sale, and so if you, once they go to resell, there's a challenge of if it wasn't affordable to start with and it's hard to market, that person who owns it now is gonna have a hard time marketing that unit, and they won't have the ability to do a seller incentive, right? So that's an additional challenge kind of versus the lower price.
Yeah, and I also do want to point out that at the lowest AMIs, the FCRHA does have a down payment assistance program, $10,000 down payment assistance, which does help folks that are up to 80% of AMI. And some of those folks actually end up purchasing 100% units. But we don't have any leeway in changing the AMI. It's a federal program, so we're set at the maximum of 80% of AMI, and we don't have the ability to offer other down payment assistance programs.
We actually just got, well, we have some, we're actually about to start offering some new down payment assistance programs. We're sort of formulating how those will work, but they're with local and local and state funds. So we're actually going to be able to try to bridge the gap in the market. So that's, kind of in addition to our CDBG down payment assistance, we'll be able to sort of set up how we target the incomes and then also the amount of that loan. So that could potentially be more than $10,000 to help people bridge the gap to the market. But also that'll, so in dovetailing into this conversation, if we're changing the AMIs here, that could be an opportunity for us to address those 100 and 120% AMI buyers without, not on the sales side, but kind of on the soft subsidy side.
Oh, great. That's great news.
Lots of things happen.
This is a comparison of some of the sold units, and we know that we currently have 11 units still remaining to sell. 63 have sold so far, 11 remaining to sell. And it shows a comparison of the average days to sell of the ones that have already sold. We talked about the 120s taking over a year to sell. And of those that are marketed, we haven't quite reached those days to sell. So we anticipate that they're still going to take quite a bit longer to sell, especially because interest rates have gone up and our pricing went up last year. So these are things that are hurting the WDU program currently. On the bottom, you can see the chart that shows in green the average price that the unit sold at a certain AMI. So, in the under 400 for the 120%, but the ones that are currently available to sell are really close to that max price, and they're, approaching 600. So this is a challenge in terms of getting the units sold. And moving on to sort of those WDU challenges to really spur the conversation here, we're interested in what this group, some feedback from this group and how we can improve the outcomes of the WDU program as a whole. So obviously we've talked about the sales prices that are starting at that maximum price, regardless of a structure type, is in itself a challenge. We know that's not something that happens on the open market. And most definitely the way that the sales prices are structured right now, they're not affordable to most families within the income tier. This is something that we are addressing currently. Right now, we're working on the WDU pricing, and the WDU pricing is going to go down in the next release that we have of pricing, and we hope to get that out fairly soon. Another challenge we've had for the industry folks that are here is we have documents that go through a fairly lengthy review process, and we are currently working with our county attorney's office to sort of streamline those documents and get to a point where not everything has to go through the same level of legal review, and we can be a little bit more responsive to builders and developers that contact us. So again, something that we are already working on. We also find a little bit of a challenge that bonus density, that no one seems to be availing themselves of additional bonus density, and would like to know what other options are there. How can we get additional bonus density, especially if we're going to be at the same time talking about lowering AMIs and potentially lowering the number of units there. What could we do for bonus density to incentivize that? Obviously AMI challenges, this has been huge for us. The higher the AMI, they need more incentives to sell. the builders are feeling that pain in holding units for a long time, and we're sympathetic to that challenge. We know that restricted properties take longer to sell, and at the higher AMIs, those families have options where they could probably purchase on the open market. So that's another thing affecting those higher income tiers, is that perhaps those folks are purchasing market rate units instead. We don't know exactly how the condo fees, maintenance costs, parking, and other additional fees are going to affect affordability across the board. We know that those amounts can tend to go up over time and will affect the affordability of units in the long run. And finally, I mentioned this really briefly before, but we have on the WDU side, it's a newer program, and we have a lack of a ready pool of qualified applicants at those higher AMI tiers. Where we've had the ADU program for a really long time, there's good word of mouth, folks are really interested in that program. We don't have the same for on the WDU side. And that's pretty much all I have. I will say on this, we do have an appendix which has all of the AMIs if you're interested in seeing that, but it's available. All I gotta say.
Questions? So does the website have all the backup and source information?
The website, yeah, we'll publish this and the links to the policy as well, yeah, and resources for the program itself.
That's where we can go get it.
I'll send out the link after the meeting.
I have a question. So do you think that it might make some sense to publish some of this information so that the developers can actually see this? Because if they know that it's going to take, a year and a half to sell at 125 and they can reduce their price and get it, they might change going into it, their expectations, and therefore come in with a lower price since that is the absolute max. So do you think that there might be some education that can be done as far as or providing information more available that it might help, or is this stuff that is not wanting to be shared because there's sensitivity items with regard to it?
I don't know that there's necessarily, we're not necessarily hiding any information. And I think I do have conversations, when there's a new development coming on, that the pricing is really the max pricing. I can't really talk somebody into, what they feel is the right price point for their product. I will say that I think there's a few that are here that have, experienced, the pain of selling those WDUs, and you've offered incentives. And I think in the first round of offering, the units were offered at that maximum, and subsequent offerings were lower. Mm-hmm. and or lower the AMIs also. So multiple incentives were offered.
So just from a developer perspective, the pro forma or expectations are kind of started really early in the process of underwriting a deal. And so when you start looking at building the model and all that, and if they just go on the website and say, 120% of AMI and I can price it this, that person is, the lower level person or the person setting up the deal, they're 3 years before even offering it. Mm-hmm. So to have that information readily available saying, well, you really shouldn't underwrite it like this because you're never going to sell it at that price. And realizing that they're, early in the process, they got to set their expectations from the developer's perspective, and just having it available on a website. I know that there's a certain page you can go to for the developer side, and Loudoun County has the same thing. And having that information would really change the mindset of the developer and underwriting pro forma going into it, and would probably alleviate a lot of the frustration, I think, of the developer. Now, I still think what we're doing here is the right thing to do. I'm just giving you that in addition to what we're doing might be something good too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you're mentioning that on the ADU and developer page on that.
Yeah.
Resources for
That's right,
developers page.
that's right. If you had this information there, it'd really
Yeah.
change the mindset of the developers.
If I could add, I mean, that's why we're so focused on doing the sale price update as soon as possible. It will take a little bit of public comment to effectuate it, but we've recognized this issue, we've actually done some kind of a workshop between our home ownership staff as well to sort of identify a long list of sort of administrative as well issues, but this is the big one that keeps coming up. And so if we can change those sale prices, we can sort of send that message both to developers who are trying to underwrite their projects as well as to the home buyers who are saying, you know, because they see something published by the housing department, they think this is an affordable price, but if we were recognizing it's not an affordable price, you know, we all kind of know that and are on the same page. I think both sides need to really be aware that the real affordable price is something that is priced for the household that is most likely, the kind of that average household that's likely to buy that unit rather than kind of this maximum household. And that's the biggest driver of the unaffordability of the pricing that we're gonna try to fix, so.
Yeah, and having the data available, as you said, could help that conversation, help back up why the price needs to be changed and needs to be reduced. So that makes a lot of sense to connect the two dots.
Just, I just, my only comment in addition, you know, from another developer standpoint is whenever we had that 2022 update, we went from 2017 to 2022, I think my superiors were all excited, you know, saying, oh, we can operate these units. And my initial reaction was one of concern because, you know, understanding the challenges we had at the 2017 level when offering at the maximum price, those problems weren't going to go away, even when we increased those amounts. So I think, you know, great point in that setting realistic expectations at the time of, you know, drafting the notice of availability, all those items just creates, you know, less issues down the road when our sales representatives are reaching out to lower the price, you know, 2-3 times. So I think, yeah, that data would be invaluable for us to have.
Mike, one thing, do you have any data on the delta between what the 120% AMI units are, between that max sale price or what they're eventually selling for, and the market rate units are in those same developments? Do you have data on that?
I can get that. I can get that data.
I think that would be really helpful because, I mean, if you think about it, 120% AMI household is, you know, pushing $200,000 for a family of 4 in the DC metro area. This is fundamentally a different market than the people that Habitat serves, for example, at 80% AMI below. And we do some mixed income, so we have some projects that float above, you know, where you're having some above 80% AMI, but those tend to be unrestricted. And we're working in some markets where it's hard to sell those at, even those market rate units, just because we're working in some cases, some lower cost neighborhoods. And so I think that if we're looking at appealing to what 120% AMI home buyers thinking is looking for, so first of all, there's the open question whether this program needs to be serving 120% AMI households. And I think that's the fundamental question that over the course of this whole process that we should be really focusing in on and asking ourselves. And obviously with the offset that, you know, for keep affordability, we're gonna have to adjust the number of units. But if you're thinking about someone who's making $175,000 a year, is looking for a home, they're not thinking they need affordable housing. So the marketing strategy, you'd be selling a completely different thing to that household than you would at the 80% AMI family that's looking for a home, or 100% AMI family perhaps is looking for a home. So I think that knowing like that delta is really critical, because the selling point for that, in my mind, just initially, is my gut reaction after watching all this, is the selling point is the ability to get, like, yes, you're giving up some upside, but you are getting in a brand new construction. So, you know, you're looking for a home of that specific type in that specific location because you are a choice purchaser. So the selling point is that delta, that you're getting that discount on the front end if you're a 120% AMI household. So having that data would be really helpful, and then from there we can really inform like how if 120% stays in the mix, how you might market those to a different buyer type. But we can also inform, like, depending on what that delta is, that should inform sort of the pricing conversation as well, because if that delta is substantial, then they're like, okay, there's still value there, maybe it's more of a marketing issue. If that delta isn't all that substantial, that gets us back to the question, like, should we be focusing on 100% AMI below?
And if I can, right, and we were talking about, would even, $20,000-$30,000 of a difference make it worthwhile to go down the, right? I mean, that's like, where is that point that actually makes it worthwhile to invest in the covenants and in the paperwork, all of that, the process. Right, exactly, right, with the equity that you can gain or not. And then I would just add that, we're still in the process of finalizing the scope of work with HRNA, but part of the analysis that they'll be looking at is looking at where do the AMI levels stack up against the market realities of the price points. So they'll be helping pull together that information as well and looking at best practices. So we'll have, we can pull together some of that data. But also we'll have support from HRNA to really look at and dive into what does it all mean, where are we right now, and all of that.
Just a question with HRNA, when is that going to kick off, and when will, how does that work within our kind of 8-month timeframe rate meetings?
That's a great question. I mean, hopefully yesterday. Right. I mean, we're looking, we'd like to have them as part of this group at the next meeting, and they can begin to share those best practices and what their understanding of the challenges are, as well as what other jurisdictions are doing. And they within the next couple meetings, they'll begin to have some of the preliminary analysis that they're working on, and then have hopefully something by the end of June finalized in their work. But they'll be able to share their progress over the next meetings that we're having. Yeah. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, because we do have a really quick timeline and we're asking a lot from you. So we're also, working with the consultants and having sort of a higher expectation for them too, to keep the pace up.
Another quick question. So I understand the policy got changed so that, 2x2s are now considered attached townhomes, and so they aren't really in the WDU category. So really now we're talking about just condo flats and like a triplex. What product now fits with the change in the zoning category that we're marketing here?
And maybe Bill could provide some background on the change that you're speaking about for the group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the
and townhomes would fall under WDU depending on location.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And part of the clarification with the rental policy that recently happened was to make sure that stacked townhouses were included and part of the mix. And so, as we look at the ownership changes, we'd also like to make sure that that's clear as part of, when we're looking for WDUs, we would incorporate stacked townhouses and hopefully townhouses as well within the mix. So, right, because that wasn't so clear.
Where stacks are considered ADUs from a single-family attached provision in terms of the percentage.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Right.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
And that was previously the interpretation as multifamily, we got codified as attached percentage.
And that was recently with the ZMOD update, and recently again next month with the ZMOD update. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on to our main portion of our agenda, which is the challenges for sale production and delivery. And I know we had Anna, you developed a couple of questions that we could use to kind of kick off discussion.
Yeah, and I think where we could probably start is kind of where Mike was going, because I think that's sort of our big overarching question here, right? Is that, is 100, we have the 80, 100, and 120, and if you could pull up the slide that had those sort of kind of go into those AMIs and just talk through what, we've sort of talked about the challenges, right, especially on the sales side, but really thinking about kind of getting your feedback initially on where those, where we kind of want to end up, and what are some of the challenges, both at the high level, also going on the lower level too, because we want to sort of talk about that full range of affordability, and also like where, where home ownership, especially a home ownership program like this, could really fit best. So that's sort of to set us up. Maybe, do you guys want to add anything?
I just want to make sure, is this the right slide that you were looking for?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. And we can also just feed off of how Mike started us off as well. Okay. Okay.
No one all jumping up.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I mean,
Scott.
in terms of the 100 to 120, I don't know, but I intuitively feel like there is a need there. And I'd like to understand more what the challenges are with the selling of those units, because it strikes me that it may not be that there's not a need, but I think as Mike said, it may be the marketing of those units, maybe it's the sale price. But I'd like to understand that more to, I guess, really get a feel for, is there a need to be served by the WD program at that level? And if there is, then I think it's a matter of figuring out how do you tweak the program to serve that need. If there's not a need, then maybe you eliminate that as an income tier in the policy.
And I'd kind of encourage us to have like an open conversation about what other tools are that we could use too. Because I mean, this program is really specific in that it creates units, right? And so we want to make sure that this type of tool, which is a supply side tool, is the right one for those incomes. And I think that's kind of where we want to sort of get to, right? Because if I know, we do know there's a lot of marketing efforts on the developer side. We know there's a lot of marketing efforts on our home ownership side. We kind of have a list that's constantly open that we're constantly vetting folks in. We also do a lot of direct outreach, which is, I think, pretty unique. So we were pretty hands-on program, and we're honestly always looking forward to we're looking for more opportunities for marketing. I think that while that is a challenge, I think what we've found from the staff level too, just working directly with these buyers, it's kind of a big hurdle to get a lot of income information and then have a restricted property. And so when you're at 120% AMI, you might make a choice for an older unit or a smaller unit versus a restricted unit. And I think that's kind of where we've seen this big tension in the market, is that you have more choice at that level. And so even though it's a brand new product, sometimes it's not going to be as desirable because of the restrictions on it.
So on the demand side, the down payment assistance and the interest rate, sometimes there's a buy down of the interest rate with Spark and all the other programs. Is that linked in any way to this supply side program, or are those something, there's been no effort to say, if you go here, you get that as a buyer, or is that completely separate at this point?
It's definitely linked. The same team that works with those home buyers kind of show them all of those options that are available. As we said, currently down payment assistance goes up to 80%, and we're looking at expanding that with our new sources we received recently. But they do talk about Spark for the up to 120% because that is available to them, since those income limits are higher. But honestly, there's just fewer incentives and fewer of those programs available at those income levels.
Martin. Sorry. But so you got 3 different tiers, and so there's problems selling at the higher tier. The question, and what I didn't see in the package or the presentation, is what is the pool of buyers at the 100 to 120, and is it there that there's plenty of buyers at that level, and there is a need for it to have them served? It's just when they look at $550,000 2-for-2, and they can buy at market rate for $650. It's just that value is just not there. So by eliminating that 125 or 120 buyer from the equation, are we cutting out a pool of buyers that do need to get served? Like 120 of AMI is not where it used to be. If you have child support, you got and you're taking care of 2 kids, and you might that's not that much money anymore. And so there might be a demand for that person to be served. It's just the pricing is just set too high. And so can we get information on who is that buyer, and before we make a determination, should that person be served? Because I don't know if that was part of the question, is should we even be offering stuff at the 120 to that buyer? So
we have a list of buyers currently in our program. It's a lot smaller than the lower income levels. think it's in the tens versus the hundreds, you know, or even the thousands, but it's really a smaller number. We can, you know, sort of get some metadata in that respect, just to sort of, you know, obviously we're not gonna share personal data, but just kind of to sort of get some general characteristics of those buyers. We could probably get some of that. We can talk to the homeownership team to see what's available, you know, being sensitive to, you know, kind of all that information.
And kind of said, I mean, I think you raise a really good point too, and it kind of plays off of what Scott was saying, which is that AMIs have changed over time, right? Because when, and Tom is not here to talk about this, but from my understanding, when the original program was set up, 100 and 120% were far more in demand than they are now. So as we look at the ratio to the cost of housing to the income levels, you know, that does change over time. So, you know, making sure we talk with the consultants and we can look at maybe future analysis, look at trends over time. I don't know that we're going in a direction that things will change back, but I mean, having that type of conversation, I think will be really important before we make any decisions to immediately, you know, take out that 120.
But that's an interesting observation. So, I mean, most of the data I've seen is that costs have been, even though AMI has been increasing quite substantially, costs have also been in sort of, so it'd be interesting to see who were if you have data on who were the 120% AMI households that were participating in the program back when those units were in more demand. And compared to who the 120% AMI households are now. So the income profile, like the job profile, if you have that data, even if we can just do some like meta-analysis of like, okay, you know, what was the typical wage for a two-income household nurse, you know, to use the stereotype the nurse and the firefighter that everyone likes to talk about. And when they do these examples of workforce housing. So what did that look like when program was more heavily utilized versus now? So understanding those trends would be probably pretty helpful in trying to understand sort of what's going on and what level of demand there is at that higher income level. Yeah, because that's really interesting. That's not what I would have expected based on just my perception of the market and the data.
I'm gonna throw an idea out here. I know, based on the stakeholders currently in the room, you know, as far as that kind of the anecdotal experience of working with 100 and 120, you know, I feel like the people that we might be missing talking to who might have better evidence might actually be the realtors, you know, NBAR, just as far as they're probably already working with those and might be able to get their, you know, understand the preferences, might be able to give us a better perspective. Because again, Mike, I'm more used to working with lower income, you know, renters and owners. You know, the developers you're working more with, again, more that kind of those higher incomes, but that average, the realtors might be able to give us a perspective that is a little bit different from, because obviously they're not the ones that are building, but they might be able to give us some insight.
I think that's a great point, Candace, and I guess to that end, does Fairfax County track like who your potential buyers are? I mean, I assume people make other choices, right? They're buying units that are not, you know, restricted, and do you ever get any feedback from them like, yeah, the pain was way too high, it took too long, whatever their feedback is, or we just don't really have that data?
I think we probably have some, I don't know that it's necessarily recorded in a, you know,
right.
But I do know we have a lot of feedback from our homeownership team that we can gather to you know, report at the next meeting. You know, what I have heard is a lot of times, a lot of the market now is creating smaller units than they used to. And I think that's also, you know, so you might choose a larger, older home versus a smaller, newer home, especially if you have those options in the market. So I know that's been a challenge, especially with the flats. And especially with flats and the flats combined with the condo fees that they'll be paying. And that's why I think we have such better sales records on the townhomes and, you know, more closer to single family size style units versus sort of the ones with the higher fees and then a bit of more dense location. I think those are still very marketable. I just think we're sort of we're really thinking about and hoping that our consultant can assist with really figuring out how we price a little bit differently when you have like a fee that's, 3, 4, 5 times what it would be for an HOA, right? So the sort of difference between an HOA and a condo is quite large.
I'm sorry for asking so many questions. I'll
That's all right.
But the one thing, how much of it, I think we're thinking about this all in terms of initial sale, the delta for the, brand new home, brand new 2/2, the delta between 100% AMI purchase price and the market rate purchase price. And that may seem like, and that can be potentially a great deal in that context. But, I think it'd be also helpful to have any data that you can pull together on resales, because, that could be the other thing that, it's one thing that for the 80%, units pegged at 80% AMI, we have a long enough term trajectory and trend around how much more unaffordable that housing has been and is becoming, especially on the ownership side of things. At that upper income level where it's, again, more preferences, choice, again, there's still needs, but, I wonder what the data says around how easy those units are to sell on the resale market with those, because the restrictions renew at every point of resale. So I think that's something for us to think about. Is that become, if these are, especially like, 15 years from now when someone sells, these are smaller units that someone was maybe willing to go through the hassle to do this to get that savings for a brand new construction unit in an amenitized condo building. That may be less, people might be thinking like, well, when this is a 20-year-old condo building, is that still going to 120% AMI sort of cap at that max sales price going to really fly? And it'd be good to have any data that we have on the resales and the historical program data, resale data.
And we have a little bit of that. I mean, I think you'd be surprised that we've already had resales in the program, even though it's not, that old. And some of at times, the SRHA has had to purchase the units in order to reduce the AMI level, because the units were just sitting for so long. And it was, we wanted to kind of make sure that they continue to serve households. So we've made that policy decision in certain cases where, currently looking at kind of creating a more, kind of really looking at all of that data together to see what our purchase policy will be moving forward. I think but we've made that decision in the past, and it really hasn't been that long, right? So these are only a few years of ownership.
Joe?
I guess back on the demand side, and maybe this is not within the scope of this group, but do we feel there's adequate supply of like education and financial literacy kinds of programs so that we are in fact generating a group of potential buyers from whatever larger pool who are, even if we don't have a product immediately for them, are being prepared to make the decision about whether to proceed?
So our homeownership program does have sort of a training session, and they work quite closely, I would say, with the buyers on their list. They not only certify their income-wise, but also have kind of a home buyer prep sort of training, so that they have to take that before they are approved to to purchase in the program.
But that's for people who've come to us already seeking. Right. So what I'm talking about is maybe
larger outreach.
Right.
Yeah. And that's absolutely something we'd like to do. I mean, I think that our struggle has kind of been, how do we get the word out?
Yeah.
And we would love feedback on that as well, because having a robust list can help us reach more people, and not everyone is going to buy, but at least everyone should understand the opportunity. So we're always trying to figure out ways to do that, and we're not, government isn't the most adept at like social media and things like that, so we're looking at those, potentially those could be strategies. Right now, it's a lot of kind of direct marketing, kind of going to employers, going to AP renters, and trying to expand the list from there. But we also are open, I would say, to partnering with nonprofits who do homeownership counseling, creating home buyers clubs, and I know those have been really successful in other jurisdictions to kind of build that pipeline of folks. We also work with, there's vouchers available through our Housing Choice Voucher Program, and we have a number of vouchers that can sort of transition people from rental assistance to homeownership, and we have been able to place folks in homeownership through that program as well. I will say the work is, there's so much individual attention. And I think that is really, one is it's very resource intensive. Our staff, I mean, they're incredibly mission focused. They care so much and they have, really good connection with folks and are able to help people through that journey. But it is very resource intensive and we try to do as much as we can to support folks and really prepare them a lot of those ways. And so definitely having some more opportunities to help us sort of branch out and sort of outside resources to help us reach folks and prepare them initially would be really helpful to then kind of get them through the door and get them in the program.
I think that's a great point. I think from my time with Virginia Housing and just trying to help get the word out about their first-time home buyer programs, which I know Fairfax takes advantage of. It's amazing, but it's just a lack of awareness really and understanding. And I think it is outreach to the realtors, the lenders, I think loan officers that really kind of where the magic can happen. I think sometimes for a family, just having different options and being aware of that, so.
I mean, linking it, for example, to the 80% MI on the rental side, do you see a lot of possibility there for people to graduate out of the 80% AMI rental into, say, the 81 to 100% AMI purchase side, or is that something that's been linked already, or do you see a lot of connection between those two programs?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the challenges though is really kind of how do you kind of bridge that and especially how do you kind of pair it with other assistance and programs, making sure that that the renter can afford a down payment, making sure that the education material when they join the program that they also have an opportunity to save towards that, and making sure that education piece of it is in it. And so I think there are challenges because of the need to figure out how to get the down payment together. And but that is the linkage is there. Anna mentioned that when units are becoming available, that is one of the first go-tos is the renter pool, especially sort of looking locally at where the unit is and who are the renters within that area, because they may be the easiest to make that leap. If they're already in that area, they like that community, they have the social network established, they made the choice to be there, they may want to stay and invest in a property.
But based on the results of how many affordable for sale is being taken down at those levels, there's not much take up, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'd have to pull the data together. I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean, so we do the marketing. I think we don't know what the result is, right?
Yeah.
We don't know if people are actually making that transition from one specific program to another. The other thing I want to just sort of on Jill's point, one thing that is limited in the policy currently is the real estate commission fees that can be paid, and that's something that we want to look at as we rewrite this too. Is what is the right way to balance our sale price so that we can have that initial sale and resales be kind of happening more in the market right now. Right now there's an opportunity for the FCRJ to purchase, and a lot of times we are purchasing units, one to sort of re-up the covenants, different things like that. So, but I think one challenge has been it's really hard to kind of the program doesn't really account for the real cost of a realtor and the real cost of the transaction. So how do we sort of think about that and not kind of throw the affordability off balance? And that's a really delicate space, but this would be a really good group to sort of vet that with too, because it's something that we've been, kind of hamstrung by a bit in both the ADU and WDU.
Just to speak to what Jill and Joe was saying is that as far as outreach and educating the market about this program, what we had done, we had a similar problem where we couldn't move our units, and we actually bought a list of people who fit that criteria and actually started marketing directly to those. So I do think that the builders can be a resource to get the word out and to market. And so, I think that is something that, and they can market a way that, that Fairfax County can't, in different ways, just because the way we go about things. And so, and then as far as price points and all that, it's like, I think that obviously the price points need to come down. And again, I think that there is still a need for that 100 to 120. It's just right now, it's just too much of a gap as far as, or not enough gap between a market rate and an affordable one. But, I just caution, I don't think we're gonna go there, but, dropping it so low that it basically becomes an ADU at that point, and then kind of defeats the purpose, because there is a need for that. And, as we sell our units, and I don't know, and it's kind of a question to Grace is, you have these 3 tiers, right? And so you're pricing your units at these 3 tiers. And if you can't sell the higher tier number because it's just your price is too high, and you drop that high tier price down to maybe 100% or 80%, well, now you can still sell that unit to someone at the 120 mark. So that's a benefit. And so the question is, again, it goes back to, if we're not marketing or not getting enough word out and serving that 100 to 120 because they just don't know about it, or again, the price is just too high, they're just not in there. But I'm curious to know is, of the builders who've dropped their pricing at the higher tier, are they selling those units to the higher tier buyer, or is it automatically going to that person that's in the 80% tier or the 100% tier?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have that information. We do have it in the Yardi database, so we can pull that information so we know exactly the AMI of the actual buyer, as opposed to the AMI, the AMI of the WDU. So we can pull that information. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, to my knowledge, Grace, because we recently kind of experienced something like that at the Park at one of our jobs. And I think we ended up just reducing the price, but I believe it was still under the 100% AMI. It didn't drop down to 80 despite it being less than the 80% threshold. So I think it still stayed at 100 because that was one we talked about going through the process of the notice of availability amendment, which we ultimately didn't have to do. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm curious to get more information.
Yeah, we'll look for data that are of actual sales in the first-time homebuyer program to see what the AMI is, to better inform those people that bought the higher AMI units, the WDUs at 100 and 120%. What was their actual income limit?
Right.
Yeah.
When you said you bought a list, can you elaborate on how that works? Where one can find a list?
I have to get more information. I know we did do it. I don't know where we got the list, but I remember we did buy a list, and we just started doing direct advertising, direct mailing, and other ways to target them. I don't know if it was like through Facebook Marketplace or, not Marketplace, but just Facebook, or what kind of advertising, or Google ads or what. But we did go directly to, but I'll get that information and bring it to the next meeting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on, just like we mentioned, the list. I haven't done a whole lot of work in Loudoun County, and I've only done, they have ADUs and AMPUs, or they might have changed WHFUs. I don't know. They've changed the name several times. But regardless, the way that I understand Loudoun, and if anyone else has more knowledge than I do, feel free to correct me, is that rather than homeowners applying for specific units, when they go onto Fairfax's website, a community comes up and they apply for a specific unit, is there an option for them to basically just apply at a certain AMI level? So not necessarily community specific, but apply at the AMI level itself, because from my understanding, that's how it works in Loudoun County. And so typically, if they've already had people that qualified at those different levels, not necessarily for a specific community, that list, basically once we have a unit that's available. I work with Jimmy Kimber on Loudoun. I don't know if you guys have worked with him before, but we're pretty much given a list within a week that is then on our sales reps to basically reach out to that list in the order in which they appear on the list. But we've had much quicker turnaround time as far as being able to sell those units. So I was just curious if that's something that would be worth looking at. And then obviously, I'm actually looking at the WDU, the unit pricing right now. Maybe even because there's so many tiers right now with the different bedrooms, condensing maybe the amount of buckets that we have, as far as what the pricings are. So that would be something that would be possible here. I didn't know if that's something you've considered or not.
That's a great idea. I mean, I don't know that we have done that in the first-time homebuyer program. So instead of, I think what you're talking about is instead of doing an individual listing where people apply online,
The drawing.
just anybody that's immediately available, that has applied for the program and is in our applicant pool that we've done sort of that certified eligible list, to all of those immediately become an option for your unit when it becomes available. So we wouldn't, there wouldn't be a separate listing period. So it's a conversation to have, I think, in a different approach to the first-time homebuyer program. So,
I think we have a list, so, right, so
Yeah, we
have
do have a list.
of people who are, they come in for just generally wanting to be in the program, and then we certify them, certificate of qualification, as defined here. And that's something that we keep, and basically, I think every opportunity is sort of marketed to those lists, and then they apply for that specific one. I think there are definitely some improvements where we want to make to that administrative process, because one is, you get qualified, you might sit on the list for a year before you actually see a unit, right? And then you're requalified, and then there's one. So I think there's, just for a sense of background, I worked in the DC's IZ program for a few years when I was just getting started. So at least have that, it's kind of very different in terms of how we sort of approach the list, which is very interesting to me, but I think we are really working to find ways to streamline it and broaden it, right? So we want to have people be able to get sort of an initial, and so this is kind of like maybe, we haven't changed it, so I want to kind of sort of preface this with like, these are some ideas, and then kind of talk through, because I think we recognize the same challenges of like, people are doing so much work to get qualified, and then they may not have a unit for a while, and then both they are doing a lot of work, and then you all are doing a lot of work on the sales side in trying to re-qualify them, make sure that they're qualified for specific development. And so if there was sort of some lighter touch, potentially kind of qualification and self-certification initially, and then you do sort of the bulk of the full qualification process with the entire, because the income certification process is a lot. And so to do that multiple times over years with multiple units, and if you're not even sure that you're interested in that unit. So we just want to, we sort of have to, and we're hoping to kind of do this effort to sort of figure out where the program will be before we really dive into that. Because like I said, even administrating is resource heavy, but we would like to kind of improve how we do that whole process. But so yes, very much appreciate that feedback. Please continue to give that to us, because all that will help us sort of improve the administrative side.
And I guess if part of that process, so recognizing that we need to be ultimately the final set of approvals, but if one goal of that preliminary process was identification of where maybe there are gaps in the family's ability to be eligible, and so it's identifying a need to accumulate down payment or a need to cure some other issues, that could again go in multiple directions and really accelerate, or maybe not accelerate, but focus on their preparation for homeownership.
Absolutely. And sometimes like things like home buyers clubs are really helpful for that, to get people to understand like, how do you build up your credit? How do you build up, and I think for us, another thing we kind of want to talk about, maybe this is a good time to sort of broach it, is the lower incomes. So I think we want to talk about the higher incomes. We also know there's a need at lower incomes for the stability that homeownership brings, and sort of the challenges of the lower. I guess we have the ADU program, which is great, but we also want to talk through sort of how, if we're sort of just looking at the income of people generally, what the challenges are for homeownership at the lower incomes as well. I mean, these also are the same, same challenges you have even at market rate, right? You have to have a significant down payment. You have to have, in some cases, sometimes you can have the assistance, so that helps. You have to have significant savings to even be a homeowner, right? Like, so you have to have, your refrigerator breaks, something kind of goes wrong, you have to have some kind of safety net to allow you to be and stay in that unit, as well as multiple challenges. So maybe the question we can kind of frame for discussion is, we sort of talked about some of the challenges at the higher end. Did you want to frame this one?
No, you're doing a good job.
So for the kind of lower income home buyers, Is there, do we need to be looking at, how low do we need to go in this program to serve? What might be missing in the market? And then what are some of the challenges to those buyers coming into the market, and are we serving them, appropriately through our programs? Are there other opportunities, or is it really, kind of fully leveraging the ADU program and then finding additional down payment assistance? So kind of want to talk through that as a higher end, lower end of the range we're looking at.
Just a question on that. I think one of your lower end mines are like 100%, was it a 16? Like 100% sold number of units?
Oh,
yeah, 70%.
70%? Does that mean there were people that had applied but were not served? If it's 100% takedown?
Yes.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah, right, because there's still a
So
list.
there's like excess demand
Yeah.
at that, do you have data on that? Like how
We
much?
have a whole list.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, we have the
How many
waiting
people
list.
applied,
Yeah.
were qualified, but there was
Yeah.
no unit for them at that price, at that
Yeah.
income.
Yeah, we can
price
pull that.
range. That we,
That almost always happens when there's a townhouse, I will just say. Invariable happens with a townhouse. And with 2/2s also, stacked townhouse, it's more likely to happen, less likely for flats. But, that's because at the 70% of AMI for WDUs, it's equivalent to the ADU. So we have that ready pool, more than 300 folks that are waiting for a unit.
because for the developers, it's a trade-off between certainty of sale
Mhm,
versus something set in a year and a half
mhm,
over
or
pro
more,
forma.
yeah.
That might be the trade-off that you guys want to be willing to take.
Sorry. So just to clarify, for those 60 to 70% AMI units, the only difference between an ADU and a WDU, from a end user's perspective, the home buyer's perspective, there's functionally no difference in that for them. It's just whether the ADUs are the mandatory, WDUs just offered through the proffer system. So, but in terms of, like, does the purchaser, I mean, other than maybe it being marked on the listing or in the deed restriction or something like that, is the experience for a 70% WD unit for the home buyer any different than the experience for a 70% ADU buyer?
Not significantly, and probably not like really materially. There might be some differences in maybe the covenants and sort of the resale provisions, but I don't think there's a lot, because I think they're really trying to mirror each other, but I have to do a little bit more.
The covenants are almost identical, although the pricing, obviously we know the WDU pricing is higher for a 70% WDU than an ADU. And ADUs are priced individually by development, where we have that one pricing sheet for WDUs that's sort of set at the maximum affordability,
Okay.
which is where kind of everybody's going.
Okay.
Which,
So that's actually a pretty material distinction.
the big challenge there again is that resale, right? So
Right.
the ADUs are much easier to resell because they're priced at a lower level that can sort of withstand the test of time on the resales. Resales that still consistently can be affordable versus the WDUs. We're seeing that, there's a big challenge kind of coming as it's very hard to resell. Something's priced high, that resale may be unaffordable immediately. So.
And that's more about the initial pricing than the resale formula itself.
It is, the fundamental is that initial price. I would say the resale formula is something that I think I have definitely put on my list to talk about, because it's based on CPI, and I think there's a lot of flux in CPI year over year. And so to think about it kind of a little bit more of a look back and sort of a more average CPI adjustment. We've done that. I've done that in a program I was with, that it makes the expectation kind of more predictable, but also less market rate. It doesn't fluctuate as much as the market does.
Right, the average of the CPI, eventual purchase prices, increased by the average CPI over the course of the homeowner period.
Yeah, or I think we did like a 10-year look back or something,
Yeah.
so the average over 10 years, and you kind of keep adding that. So otherwise you're getting like a 1% 1 year, 5% another year, versus for like a 2 to 4% that you can kind of consistently, that's.
Of the units that have been produced and delivered to date, do we know, I mean, obviously we probably know, but can we share the information related to any resales that have happened with those units?
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Mike, I also want to mention that on the pricing of the ADUs versus the WDUs is that pricing for WDUs includes a 3% closing cost, so that the buyer rarely brings money to the table to close on the ADU side, when the WDU does not include that.
Okay.
So there's a lot more cash to close on a WDU.
Okay, that's good.
Does the county always, like if someone's like tries to resell their unit and they can't, let's say they didn't maintain it or whatever, does the county always come in and will buy it?
We do not always do, we do not have like a policy to always do it. We have in the past, and for various reasons that, we sort of look at the situation and decide whether it's, first of all, it has to be affordable to us, right? It has to be something that we can resell. And we have sort of price triggers, and we have sort of a list of criteria. And we also kind of look at a lot of, different factors. I will say we have purchased units, and much easier in the ADU program because they are priced where we know we can still keep it affordable. And then we've been able to kind of do some rehab to those units at times that sort of still fits into the affordable price that we can then resell sort of like a unit to a household pretty quickly. And that goes, obviously the price point is that important piece too, because it's like that we have such a big list that is looking for those, 60, 70, 80% units.
Sort of tagging on that, I don't know that this is actually a situation, but if someone's trying to move, potentially have to move out of the area and they are struggling to sell it, are they able to rent it, or is that a no-no on the covenants?
It is not permissible under the covenants to rent your unit. I have to look back to see if there is any waiver of that. No, okay, no waivers of that.
Just because I think, again, we have a lot of, transitional population here with military, government, and some of those, especially the military, you do have folks that may even fall into those income categories, and so that's why I'm just curious.
Yeah. I think that's something we can look at. It would have to, there's a few challenges to it. One is that it has to be like very restricted, right? So it has to be like, you have to prove, you have to like get really, really, it has to be like a reason where it's, you can't stay in the unit pretty much, and sort of job is probably the most likely. It also requires a lot of administration on the back end and kind of making sure you're sort of checking in, and it has to be for a succinct period of time. So the 1 year, the 2 year potentially. So, and then also there's the challenge of renting it to an affordable renter. So there's really a lot of challenges to that kind of waiver process. So I don't think the county does it. I've administrated that on another program, but it is a big challenge to kind of make sure that people are, it's a big challenge enough to make sure that you're sort of getting the annual certification of their occupant too. So there's a lot kind of on the back end that is done that's,
There was an older program prior to the ADU, the moderate income direct sales, where it wasn't covenant, it was like deed restricted. And on those units, after they paid a second trust, they were allowed to rent to affordable. But I don't think that we've ever done that for either for ADUs or WDUs. We have had folks that are military have said, I'm not going to be there, can I rent my unit? The answer has been, you can't rent it, but you don't have to occupy it, so you don't have to meet the occupancy requirement. So somebody else can occupy the unit during your absence, for work reasons, but you can't rent it. Can't rent it out.
It would be cool if like they could bring the unit to the housing authority, and housing authority could then rent it to someone that fits within the ADU or, Section A or whatever, and then there might be some, where the housing authority may, if there's a delta between the mortgage payment and the rental rate, maybe the housing authority can, and maybe the builders can help out by, part of their proffers adding, funds to help in that, pool to help, in this situation in which, someone can't sell their WDU.
Couldn't that hurt finance? I wonder how like Fannie and Freddie would look at something like that, because I know that obviously you're allowing a different form of economic potential for a property in the event that someone has to move and unable to sell. But like, on the other hand, like with it just being clean that you can't rent it out. It's like you're not gonna get people trying to take on a second or, buy some, have their rent or their mortgage price wherever else they're living and trying to rent this unit out. And if they can't rent it out or can't manage it with all the different restrictions we're talking about, then there's the risk of them, falling behind on their mortgage. So I'm not opposed to it. I just wonder how if Fannie and Freddie might be.
And if I could, on that, the SRG has purchased units for its rental housing programs to have sort of scattered site units available. A lot of times we really look at the larger units for those, as well as units with sort of higher standards of accessibility, and other units that can kind of serve special needs populations. So that's what we've sort of done in the past in terms of bringing sort of our population, the other side of the house of the, kind of the operations side where we do have properties that we own and manage. We have a large population there, so that some of the voucher holders are able to, use those units as well. And I think I definitely take your point there. I think the more restrictions there are, the more challenges it does become. It becomes a challenge to both administrate and also, to finance and for the clarity for the lenders to be able to. And we already have worked really closely, I think, with lenders to create, to make sure we are creating covenants that they can finance. So I think the more kind of.
Yeah.
And it was also the SRG has stepped in at times when, where we feel like we have an opportunity to resell, to sort of, I don't know, that's been kind of our approach often is that there's an opportunity to keep the unit in the program, re-up the covenants. Maybe someone's occupied for 10 years, there's only 20 years left. We want another 30-year covenant, so we can kind of buy it to resell it. So some of the strategies that we've done to sort of make sure, especially, I think sometimes it's been cases of kind of people getting behind, but a lot of times it's just, a really good opportunity for us to either keep it in the program or use it for rental housing. And on that also, and there's more discussion on that topic.
I guess, would HCD be opposed to sort of the incorporation of some sort of more deliberate policy about that repurchase as part of our work? I mean, maybe not a requirement to do it, but a more formalized review process or something.
I would say that we're probably going to have a challenge getting through the big picture, so I think.
That's a parking lot item.
Yeah, let's go on a parking lot item for now, because I think we do have a lot on our plate to kind of in the policy itself to go through, and I think but we'd, appreciate the advisory, kind of feedback on sort of that policy too, I think generally, but I think focusing on kind of the specific items in the policy are really important. But I would love to touch on the term of the affordability, because I think that's another, sort of way we're different than a lot of jurisdictions. And I was recently on a call with that Metro Washington Council of Governments have put on, and that this came up about terms, and a number of jurisdictions that talked about what their terms are. We know some are in perpetuity. We know some are in sort of in the 40 years or in longer. I think we have currently.
And some are shorter.
And some are shorter, yes. And I think the recent move has been to longer. We wanted to kind of talk through that, I think, to sort of set the stage of the conversation. There's always a trade-off in restricted homeownership, right? So you're never going to realize if there's sort of a covenant with any term. If you don't stay in there for the entire term of that covenant, you're not going to realize the full market appreciation of the unit. However, there is a huge benefit in the savings that you're going to have with just saving under the principal of your home, and that you're paying into sort of a savings account. You also do get a modest appreciation through the program, so there is that. And you're also able to make choices with the additional income that you have because your rent or your monthly payment is affordable. You have the other space in your income to make it sort of more choices. So I think that's sort of the big benefits of having the affordable homeownership model. The challenge then is, who gets the most benefit out of the eventual resale, right? As a government entity, we want to keep our inventory. We want, our big goals are no net loss of affordable units. And so, to have a longer affordability term definitely benefits more home buyers and can benefit sort of the program. To have a shorter affordability term, obviously you can get, a lot more out of it if you're able to stay in the whole time. I actually made a note yesterday to get the data, which we don't have available immediately, which I'm sure you're gonna ask about, is how many people actually reach the end of their 30-year covenant, right? It's not that many, right? We have a lot of resales with more than 30 years, but some do. And then that's when we kind of, we have a profit sharing mechanism as well. But I wanted to kind of open that up and have that discussion, right? This is an important one to see where the right term is. I will say the transactional cost for the SRHA kind of purchasing and reselling units, just to kind of keep units in the program, is a big challenge for us. We have the closing costs on both the purchase and the sale. We want to be supportive of home buyers, but we also really want this program to run independently and to continue to serve home buyers, and to also be able to really kind of be more independent in the real estate space, and sort of outside of us, besides qualifying buyers, to not necessarily shepherd as many of the transactions, right? Because that is a challenge. We want to be able to be there for support. We want to but we do want it to function independently. So all that to say, in terms of the term of the affordability, right now we have a 30-year term in the program. So wanted to kind of discuss, and we'll also have some best practice research from our consultants in the next meeting to sort of give us more on that. But any initial?
So I'm going to say, I'm going to echo the trend that you're talking about towards longer habitat. I mean, just echo in the sense that that's the way we're seeing mission-driven builders, those of us whose mission is affordable, capital A, capital H, affordable housing, so to speak. The shift is towards doing more permanent affordability, or as close to permanent as possible. Habitat, we're participating in the Virginia State Community Land Trust, which is recently formed, so that not every single one of we're not saying that every single unit that we produce from here at this point forward will necessarily go to the land trust or be permanent affordable, because we have to take each project case by case and make sure it works and is sustainable. But our goal is permanent affordability moving forward. I think that given the market dynamics of this region, that's probably the right move, because if not necessarily permanent, but like focusing on a lengthier affordability period, because it's as more and more of the region is getting built out. We've already seen plenty of production challenges. What we don't want to see is just, you're providing, yes, it's great that we're providing that first purchaser an affordable purchase price, but then sort of that's forever lost in the inventory. I think that's a huge missed opportunity. But now there are obviously the trade-offs you mentioned. If counties continuing to having to step in to preserve affordability because things are staying on the market, there obviously needs to be tweaks and reforms to the program to make that resale process less arduous and more sort of what's the right word? More self-sufficient, so to speak, and that it can operate more akin to the market other than that qualification process. And I think what that comes down to is the purchase price. I mean, the lower the purchase price is as a starting point, then you get the resale formula right, then your people are still able to get that equity, but it's still more affordable to the initial to the eventual owner. And I know there's trade-offs then in terms of the number of units that you can get out of the program, but if you look at the recycling over time, if every unit that's produced eventually serves 5 first-time home buyers, even if you're reducing the number of units you get out of it by 1 or 2, or I'm just making up numbers here, but I think that may be worthwhile. Again, we actually want to run the numbers to see what the trade-offs are. But I want to put a big stake in the ground that we're very supportive of the longest affordability period that is economically feasible and works for the homeowner.
Can I ask you a question, Mike, and how you deal with aging properties and rehab that might come up over, like what do you have to sustain that, to help with that?
So the permanent affordability and land trust approach at Habitat is fairly new. So our land trust property, we're putting our first properties into the community land trust this year. And there'll be 3 units in Fairfax County, in the Groveton neighborhood. And then another project that we're working on in DC, it's gonna go into the Douglas Community Land Trust there. So we at Habitat don't have our own, at our affiliate, the long-term history to say, this is what we've experienced. You know, I've done a lot of work in my past roles with other community land trusts across the country. And this is where it gets into, there are some challenges with that. Some of them include, it gets down to the resale formula. Are you able to sort of make it easier for homeowners to, you know, you want to reverse that, get rid of that perverse incentive not to invest in your property if you know you're not going to be, if you're buying now, but you think, yeah, this is maybe 10 years, not the forever home type thing. So, you know, if you're able to capitalize some of the money that you put in for major systems upgrades, things like that, into the subsequent purchase price, I think that is something that some jurisdictions have done. Like, and I think Fairfax County, I don't know if the extent to which it already does that. It's purchase price. Like, say, I don't know if like if you
Capital improvements increase.
If you replace the furnace in year 20 or 25, then you can get some credit for that in the resale price. So others are taking a little bit more of a proactive role in just you know, exercising right. If you're a community land trust, you typically own the land underneath the improvement, so you have a little bit more leeway in terms of, you know, having access to the property and being able to make sure that everything's in a state of good repair. But there's always the problem with routine maintenance where, you know, just the house was lived in type repairs. You know, that's in some cases, some CLTs kind of, or might budget, have sort of budget for like sort of like rehabs to market to the eventual homeowner. But in some cases, the subsequent homeowner may actually, you know, because they're getting such a discounted purchase price, may have some then leeway to make the changes and improvements that they want to do to their own house. Sort of not necessarily buying a fixer upper, so to speak, but being able to put some of their own TLC into it. So it all depends on that trade-off between purchase price and sort of in the level of discount that you're getting. But that is a difficult nut to crack, and for a program like this that is a non-CLT sort of nonprofit run model where it's a government program, it's jurisdiction wide. You have sort of, even if you have, you know, condo properties or HOAs, it's, you know, scattered private ownership of those. You know, it's not a, you know, public housing per se or community land trust per se that is that nexus point. So that would actually be something that is more difficult. But with what we're at 30 now, you know, I don't think the difference between 30 and 50 isn't going to be demonstrably more difficult, because most people, we're talking about the edge cases here where people stay for, you know, 35, 40 years instead of 30. You know, it's not that much of a difference. In most cases, the same problems you're going to be dealing with after a resale at 20 years and 23 years would be the same in a permanent affordability structure. Sorry for having so much.
And it would probably be helpful to see the increase or the trend of AMI increase versus the trend in the CPI increase, to see where, you know, almost like model where a purchase price was, you know, could have been at some point, and then how much that would have increased versus the AMI. So if we can sort of follow that trend to see like what a household could afford 20 years down the line, and could they afford those extra capital improvements in their purchase price, and sort of thinking about that. So that's something we could probably have that consultant look at when they look at their purchase price.
Grounded Solutions Network, which is kind of the industry group for permanent affordability and CLTs, they have some pretty good resources on stewardship. I mean, a lot of their stewardship resources are on the stewardship of affordability, but I think they also have some bricks and sticks stewardship resources as well. So that's a place to check out. I actually know some of the folks there, so we have a little bit to talk to them as part of this process. We probably arrange it.
No, I was just gonna ask about the affordability term for ADUs. Is it also 30 years as well? And that's always been the case. That is
I think it's fluctuated over time.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
15.
Oh, okay.
Started at 50, then it went to 15.
Oh, wow,
then to
okay.
30.
It's, yes. But yeah, I think, so it's changed over time, and I think that same sort of conversation that we're having is sort of how things are.
Yeah.
And I think that with the trend of longer affordability.
Yeah, that's definitely the trend, I would say, for sure.
But I would say a lot of people consider 30, like 30 if it renews at every resale. That's kind of considered good enough to be in that permanent affordable category. Not depending on who you talk to. But I don't think that if you marketed the existing program as capturing permanent affordability or near permanent affordability, you probably wouldn't get much pushback on it by folks who need it, that are very familiar with that because, again, because of the proportion of homes that do sell within the first 30 years, or any subsequent 30 years. So it's really that renewal provision, you can get away with not having this super extended, like if you wanted to say, like, if you've lived in that house for 30 plus years, it's your, you fully paid off your mortgage, everything like that, like you should be able to fully benefit for the upside. Like the number of examples is so few and far between that would, I think Fairfax County is still considered, I think Ground Solutions may still have to go back and look at their database, but I think they would have you in that bucket of permanent affordability right now as it is.
And how did I'm interested in like how does that work with, being honest about, equity issues and wealth building goals and recognizing that these programs don't always address that, and how do we, how does that play into the consideration too? I mean, I totally get the permanent affordability, goal and that, but just wanting to be honest about.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's kind of where, sort of that safe setting conversation of like, it'll be good to sort of show, and something that we can kind of maybe put in sort of like a slide with some data. One is how many people actually stay for that full term, right? Yeah, that's an important thing to know. And then the other thing is, the already how much you're building as you go down, because I think what's often people sort of think of that increase as the only amount that you're getting, but there is that, and there's so many benefits to that, creating that savings account, and you get that money back too. So it's not like you're walking away with only whatever that increase is, like you've been saving for yourself and for your own, so I think there's while it's not gonna, and I think we also have to recognize the market in Fairfax County, I think, nationwide, we have a pretty crazy market, right? So like, if you sort of think about the potential upside, while that is, I think there is definitely opportunities for like, I think it's definitely, it's a balance. And that's a tough thing because when you talk about the equity piece, like you want to have those opportunities to kind of address sort of the past and kind of how you can address sort of the inequities that have happened. And I'm not sure that it's almost like you need multiple programs to be able to address all of the things, right? Because you want to have sort of this consistent opportunity for people to purchase, and that the only way to keep that is to keep some type of really long-term affordability in some portfolio, in some group of units. And then there's also ways to potentially have loan forgiveness and sort of like have a soft second that gets forgiven or things like that, and potentially also do serve as sort of the equity piece and help bridge for certain families. So,
question. So in the rental program, you recertify every year for your income. Obviously, if you purchase, I'm assuming you're not recertifying after you purchase. So if your income is increasing, that's actually the benefit. Whereas if you're in the rental program and your income increases by, right, you got a couple options, but that's basically what's happening is we're pushing you into market rate at that point. That would be actually some interesting data. I don't know if the consultant is able to develop that, but just to kind of look at what that might have looked like for, again, folks that were able to purchase it affordable, like did their incomes increase? Was that actually a contributing factor to wealth building or not? So just a thought as far as I kind of struggle with the whole, we want to keep the affordability, but at the same time, part of homeownership is supposed to be a wealth building tool, but how much of a wealth building tool is it if we're having to limit how they can actually eventually profit from what they've invested in? So, but if they're able to actually increase their incomes enough over time that could be, again, a qualifying variable, so.
And the data, I mean, it all depends on program structure. It
Right.
depends on like what the AMI level is at purchase. It depends on what the purchase price is and the discount over market. And would you be able to, what your option, and then the third variable, what your other option would be on the private market if you weren't able to access that. So, you know, how equitable the program is depends on the interplay of those three factors. So if you're taking people that could potentially get a high upside, you know, a open market unit potentially based on their income, if they participate in the program, you don't get all that heavy of a discount, and then the resale formula really limits their upside, and that's a pretty inequitable program. But on the other hand, if you're targeting the program with the income limits, you're targeting people that otherwise have very few options on the market, and giving them a really affordable purchase price that creates a delta. Even if you have someone that does have other options on the market, if you're giving that delta, but then a big delta in the initial purchase price, and then they are able to gain some equity if you have a solid resale formula, you know, that's got a completely different implications for both equity building in the financial sense and then the social equity sense as well. The research on shared equity home ownership programs is pretty strong that on average people do build a considerable amount of wealth, and not maybe necessarily in a market like DC where people are seeing in some cases astronomical wealth creation in the private market, but that's the reason why we have to have this program. That's the whole point of this exercise. So is that we need to have some level of affordability moving forward. So again, the devil's always in the details. So there's definitely ways to structure a program in a way that kind of threads that needle that allows people to get that foothold on the ladder and gain some equity and keep it affordable for the next generation or the next homeowner. But there's also ways to get that pretty wrong and do some harm on it. And so I guess that's what we'll be talking about over the next 9 months.
I would just say it's like you have different tiers, right? You got, you know, rental program, affordable, you know, then you have the ADU program, then you have the workforce. And I thought the purpose of the workforce is to kind of help with that firefighter, you know, teacher, maybe they're dual salary, and you know they're not really in the tier of the ADU kind of buyer, and you know, and maybe you know they do making like $125,000, $150,000, and you know for them to be in the program, they're going to want to see, you know, that it's not so limited on their up, that they're only going to get CPI, you know, increase, and so and I think it would be interesting to know is of the affordable product in Fairfax County, how much is WDUs? Because I think it's a pretty small fraction. I mean, it's like a real small, and I think it's a targeted kind of piece for, you know, that what everyone thinks, that firefighter, the policeman, or dual income, you know, family, and all that, and to limit them as far as the upside, because once they kind of graduate or they want to move to another house, and if they only got CPI and a little bit more, yeah, they got saved all that. But, you know, if house prices jumped, you know, 50% and all they got was, you know, a 20% return, they're backwards. They're further back than if they just got a regular market rate, lesser quality house. So, I mean, I think from that perspective, it'd be good to know exactly how much are we talking about as the affordable portfolio of Fairfax County to understand, hey, it's not like we're going to solve this affordable problem with the ADU, you know, buyer or the program. It's really a niche program, and we just need to fix it at the edges and not repurpose it to become an ADU program. For what it's worth.
The other thing we haven't really touched on is sort of the difference between the product types too, because for the flats and condos, you're going to have a lot more turnover, and so when you really think about kind of that long-term wealth building, it's going to be, I guess, less applicable to a big chunk of the units. Actually, the majority of units that are being created. It's not, you know, people are not staying for that long. They've already had turnover in some of the condos, so I think that's also important to consider. Sort of like, you know, that might be really impactful in like you know, a 3-bedroom townhome potentially. Somebody might actually be able to stay there, grow into it, and sort of stay there with their family, but potentially like a 1-bedroom condo, that's going to be something that somebody could potentially grow out of more quickly. And so they, you know, to sort of think about that more as a permanent opportunity for somebody to have a, you know, a small, like a, you know, a temporary wealth building opportunity and temporary not wealth building, sorry, but it is, I would say wealth building, but in a different, smaller way. But, and sort of a permanent sort of affordability for a while, for as long as, until they get to their next step in the housing spectrum. So I think there's kind of that sort of continuum. I think there's an important, I think some distinctions there too, so I kind of talk about it broadly, but it does get pretty granular when you look at the housing types also.
Could you also explain maybe in the next meeting, just, because I understand it was like 30 years, but maybe like the first 15 years they can resell it at X, and then after the 15 years, there's a different formula, like it'd be interesting to know.
That was for the ADUs, yeah.
It was not for that, for the WDUs? Oh.
We use like the 30 years, and then after the 30 years, there's like a profit sharing mechanism. So the SRHA gets half of the upside.
I was just gonna ask the same question. I thought we had that with we don't have that with WDUs, right?
You do have an equity share, but it's after 30 years. So I think
You'd have to put with the same owner after 30 years?
Yeah, because usually it
it
re-ups after another owner, yeah.
Just 30,
yes.
just CPI for 30, and then profit sharing after 30.
Yeah, if you sell it, then it's profit sharing, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, who sets the price that when there's a resale like that? I know there's a formula, but then does the homeowner get to choose their own formula, or do we do something like that as a county?
We issue the
We do it,
price.
right?
The county executive is given that authority.
One last comment, and then we'll start to do our final wrap-up since
It was actually a question, and I could see if this is an issue that's germane. And it's a question for the market rate builders, because we're like build 100% affordable, or we're the reverse. It's going to be 80% affordable or 20% market rate offset. So we're kind of doing the reverse of what you're doing. So this is, when you're looking at this and just thinking about program details and getting program details right, having so many income bands in a project, is that helpful to give you sort of options for segmentation? Or is that just add complexity to it? It'd be easier if you could just say, 2 tranches of WDUs instead of looking through 4.
For me, I don't, maybe it's different for you, but for me, when we went through this program, it wasn't that bad to have the three tiers, even though we're never going to get the pricing that was set up in the high tier. But again, I still think there's a value, not necessarily from the builder perspective, but just from a citizen perspective of being able to serve that person that's in that tier and just reduce the price to meet, their demand.
And I'm not saying, I'm not talking about lowering the income level. I'm saying just the number of bands. So just having holding the income levels harmless. No change, but having fewer bands.
From a builder perspective, it doesn't matter to me, but from a citizen perspective, I'd say I kind of like the idea that you're trying to get, making certain that each one is served equally.
From a humanitarian standpoint, yes, I agree with Mark. I would say, we do a lot of 2/2s that are workforce and affordable plan from different income. We don't change our product type based on different income levels. So it's still the same cost going out the door. Again, we enjoy offering in different income tiers, but I don't know that necessarily affects the bottom line outside of what we've seen as far as being able to offload those lots.
And it's not a big problem from a complexity or compliance standpoint.
I would just say it might be a little bit different in a condo building versus a 2/2 or a single family project, but I know sort of anecdotally when the Tyson's bands came in, there was a lot of worry about that with 5 different income bands, but lenders sort of figured it out.
Okay, well, this has been, I think, hopefully helpful. It certainly seems to be productive. I'm going to move us to our last item on our agenda, which is to kind of quickly make a decision about our meetings for the rest of the task force. So if you look at attachment 4, really we're kind of trying to make some decisions between Fridays versus Tuesdays. And so now is your time to weigh in.
And
Yeah, pull out Outlook
And if I may, I think the reason why just to give some background, the reason why we're doing this is because I think maybe when Tom had initially spoke with you all, he had said that the meetings would be regularly on Fridays, but there were some conflicts on the staff level with the Friday date. Not taking long weekends, we just have other commitments with AHAC meeting on Fridays and things like that. But anyway, so the Tuesday option was offered. Just for those who are looking at the calendars, we checked, these are not board meeting days. These are board committee days, all except June 20th, which doesn't have anything on the board, which is wild. And you'll notice that the Friday date is maintained for May because May is in the board calendars just very busy with the budget markups and all of that. So we have to keep the Friday date for May. So I think just to put it out there, if it works to have the Tuesdays, we would certainly like to try that. But we wanted to make sure we put it out to the group.
So up or down, how do we feel? Who can handle the Tuesday proposed dates? Do the Tuesdays work for everybody? Not work at all?
It might not work for me,
Might not work?
starting the fall. Well, maybe the last two, because I may be teaching Tuesday.
Okay.
And these are all 9:30 to 11:30.
Yeah,
these
not-
are all
yeah.
Oh,
in
they're
the morning, same time.
Same time here.
Okay, well, that
Yeah.
might
They're all
work.
in person.
That might work.
That works.
That works.
Yeah, that works. I think that's okay.
Who does it not work for? How about that? Doesn't work really well for Littlemore.
And
Tuesdays,
No.
yeah, it's kind of the same for me.
Yeah.
Meetings.
I would say Tuesdays are not as good as the Fridays.
It's the same.
So Fridays are better?
A red and a green.
Okay, I'm gonna make you raise your hands. If you prefer.
Oh, sorry, and I just want to say, sorry, because Lenore, you did just mention about are they all in person? And they don't have to be. When we'll talk at the next meeting about hybrid meetings. I can send out the requirements for hybrid meetings. I think there's something like we as a group can decide for maybe a quarter of the meetings to be virtual if we need to, even though we're trying to do them in person. But then you as an individual also has an additional 2 meetings or so that you could do virtually. So I'll get the numbers right.
So that might work on Tuesdays.
Right, there's some flexibility with that, and we can set that up.
Can we maybe vote on by email?
Yeah.
Because if it's staff's preference to do Tuesday, I may be able to move stuff around.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we'll first do it as do you prefer Tuesday or Friday? So vote one time, and let's see where we're net out on that, and then we can do if it absolutely has to be, you'll live with it, kind of a choice, and then if it won't work. So Tuesdays, absolutely prefer versus the Friday dates. Staff, raise your hands. Okay, Fridays? Don't care.
I think I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
I think we've got Fridays, y'all.
Okay.
Okay.
So shall we wrap?
I think we're good to adjourn at 11:29.
Wow.
One job, we are ending on time.
I can make Tuesdays work if we need
And
Friday.
It seems like
something.
the preference of Fridays for
So you're talking about like
most
getting
of
like
us,
this
so.
PowerPoint?
So we started a minute late and then we ended a minute early.